The galaxy had given up. That was the cold, hard truth, a fact as undeniable as the vacuum of space itself. For the people of Haven, the last glittering jewel of the Ethel race, hope was a currency they had run out of, a line of credit that had been brutally revoked. Outside the reinforced adamantium walls of the command bunker, the sky itself was bleeding fire and death. The orbital bombardment, a relentless drumbeat of annihilation orchestrated by the Scythe hegemony, had finally paused. But the silence that descended in its wake was 1,000 times more terrifying than the thunder of explosions. It was a predatory silence, the deep, patient breath of a wolf before it lunges for the throat. It was the sound of an entire civilization holding its last breath. Deep beneath the planet's scarred crust, in the heart of Bastion Command, Commander Elias Vance, a man who looked like he was carved from the same granite as the mountains around him, stood motionless. He was 57 years old, but the last 3 weeks had aged him a century. His face was a roadmap of exhaustion, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on a single, glowing crimson button on his command console. An emergency broadcast. A last-ditch, 1 in a billion shot in the dark. A signal aimed not at their so-called allies, but at ghosts. At a myth. His young strategic advisor, Lena Petrova, couldn't stand the stillness. Her nervous energy filled the void left by the bombardment, her pacing a stark contrast to his stoic calm. Her voice, when she spoke, was a strained whisper, tight with desperation and disbelief. "Elias, you can't be serious," she hissed, her eyes darting from his unmoving form to the hateful red button. "You're actually considering calling them? After everything that happened at Orion Flare? The Concord will have our heads, what's left of them to have. They'll brand us as heretics for even attempting contact." Vance's hand, scarred from a plasma burn he'd taken in his youth, hovered over the button, a breath away from sealing their fate, one way or another. The Ethel Confederacy, once the proud and peaceful stewards of 16 vibrant star systems, a civilization known for its art and philosophy, was now reduced to a single besieged planet, counting down its final, agonizing hours. A violent tremor, stronger than the rest, rocked the bunker. Crystalline dust, remnants of the planet's unique geology, rained from the vaulted ceiling. Red alert klaxons, a sound that had become the new normal, screamed to life. An officer's voice, hollow and strained, crackled over the intercom, each word another nail in their collective coffin. "Sir, the Southbridge continent just went dark. All comms, all life signs gone. The Scythe are targeting our last geothermal power generators. Our shields are at 12% and dropping. The next full barrage will shatter what's left. It will be the end." Vance closed his eyes for a single, fleeting second. He saw the faces of his crew, young, brilliant, terrified, but still looking to him for a miracle he didn't have. He thought of his fleet, the pride of Ethel, vaporized in the first treacherous hours of the assault. He thought of his friends, men and women he'd shared meals with at the academy, now just atoms scattered across the system. He would not lose his people, the last 8 million Ethel, without playing his last, most insane, most desperate card. He opened his eyes, the stormy gray now as hard as steel. He made his decision. And the galaxy would never be the same. Commander Vance's gaze, sweeping over the tactical display, was cold iron. The map was a sea of red icons, the angry symbols of the Scythe hegemony, swarming his world like cosmic vultures. The few remaining blue icons representing his own forces were flickering, on the verge of being snuffed out entirely. He turned to Lena, his voice low and raspy, each word scraping its way out of his throat. "What choice do we have, Lena? Tell me. Who else is there to call?" He gestured dismissively at the dead communications panel. "The Galactic Concord. Our great protectors. They're buried in logistical difficulties and bureaucratic reviews. They've been reviewing our extinction for 3 weeks. Our supposed allies in the Centauri coalition, who we've traded with for 500 years, have suddenly gone silent. They've muted their comms, Lena. Muted them. They are sitting on their hands, listening to us die. Lena's face, usually so composed, was pale. But the humans, Elias, they aren't just allies who've gone silent. They are a force that actively rejected the galaxy. They isolated themselves for 2 decades. They built a wall around their system and told everyone to stay the hell out. They want nothing to do with us, with our politics, with our wars. I know, Vance cut her off, his tone sharp enough to draw blood. The name of the event that had precipitated humanity's exile hung unspoken in the tense air of the command center. The Orion Flare Incident. It was more than a battle, it was a ghost story the Concord told to frighten disobedient systems. Even the youngest ensigns, who were toddlers when it happened, knew the terrifying tales. They knew how the human fleet, responding to what the Concord had deemed a minor border skirmish with a pirate clan, had unleashed weapons that didn't just break starships, these seemed to break the very laws of physics. They had deployed gravitational shears that folded cruisers in half and fired projectiles that phased through shields to detonate inside reactor cores. They had won in 7 minutes what the Concord estimated would take a month, and had done so with a brutality that shocked the galaxy. When the Concord, terrified not by the pirates but by humanity's quantum leap in technology, had censured them, the humans hadn't argued. They hadn't protested. They had simply, and silently, withdrawn. They took their terrifying innovations, their unpredictable nature, and their fierce pride, and vanished behind a veil of silence. Vance turned to his chief tactician, a wizened Ethel named Vel, whose 4 eyes, a trait of their species, were all wide with a kind of resigned dread. Vel, give me the numbers. Be blunt. Survival probability if we face the next scythe wave on our own. The old tactician didn't even need to consult his console. The grim reality was etched onto his soul. Less than 10%, Commander. And that is if I'm feeling wildly, irrationally generous. In truth, sir. It's 0. We are statistically already dead. And with outside help. Vance pressed, his voice tight. Even unconventional help. Vel's luminescent skin, a hallmark of the Ethel people, pulsed thoughtfully. It depends on what they bring to the fight, Commander. Their response time, their capabilities. But I will say this, any variable, no matter how wild, is infinitely better than the certainty of 0. As if on cue, a cataclysmic impact, far louder and closer than before, slammed into their defenses. The entire bunker, buried a mile beneath solid rock, groaned and shifted like a dying beast. The main lights didn't just flicker this time, they exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into absolute, terrifying darkness. For 3 heart-stopping seconds, the only sound was the sharp, panicked gasps of the crew. Then, the blood-red emergency lighting kicked in, painting everything in hellish tones. A young weapons specialist, his voice cracking with pure terror, screamed from his station. Shield integrity at 7%. That was a direct hit on the primary emitter. We're exposed, sir. The next volley will punch straight through to the planetary crust. That was it. The final push. The end of the line. All debate, all hesitation, was incinerated in that single moment. With a final, resolute breath, Elias Vance slammed his scarred hand down on the broadcast button. His voice, now impossibly steady and formal, cut through the rising tide of panic like a laser beam. This is Commander Elias Vance of the Ethel Confederacy, broadcasting on all pre-isolation Terran emergency frequencies, Channel 7 Delta. The planet Haven is under final assault by Scythe hegemony forces. Our defensive grid has failed. We are facing imminent and total extinction. Under the Articles of the First Contact Mutual Defense Pact, we hereby invoke Article 7. We request immediate, unconditional military assistance. He paused, letting the formal, legalistic request hang in the ether. Then, his voice dropped, losing its military stiffness and becoming that of a man making a personal plea across the abyss. My grandfather served on the science vessel Odyssey, he said, his voice now thick with emotion. He was there, in your soul system, when your scientists helped us synthesize the cure for the Kalan blight that was devastating our colonies. You gave us that cure freely, when every other species in the Concord, fearing contamination, wouldn't even answer our calls. The Ethel remember our debt. We have not forgotten what we owe you. He released the button. The signal, a digital prayer encoded on a frequency most galactic species had dismissed as archaic junk code, shot out into the infinite, silent void. Now there was nothing left to do but wait. The room was as silent as a tomb. The remaining crew stared at him, their faces a swirling mixture of awe, disbelief, and abject terror. They had just watched their commander reach out and try to touch a ghost. Lena Petrova walked to his side, her earlier sharpness gone, replaced by a deep, sorrowful certainty. They won't come, Elias, she said softly, not as a rebuke, but as a statement of fact. Even if they receive the message, why would they risk everything for a people who stood by and watched while the Concord condemned them? Because my grandfather told me something else, Vance replied, his voice a low rumble, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen showing the angry red swarm of enemy ships. He said you never, ever bet against a human who believes you owe them one. But more importantly, he said you should never doubt a human who believes they owe you. Another massive barrage struck what was left of their shields. The lights flickered violently. The end was no longer approaching, it was here. It was clawing at the door. Then, a shout from the sensor station cut through the despair. A young ensign, barely out of the academy, was on her feet, her 4 eyes wide with shock. Commander. I'm detecting anomalies. At the system's edge. Multiple, high-energy events. Vance's heart plummeted. Scythe reinforcements. No, sir, she stammered, frantically trying to make sense of the readings. These energy signatures, they're wrong. They don't match any known warp signature in the Concord database. The physics, sir, the physics are impossible. On the main view screen, the image of deep space flickered, then resolved. At first, there was nothing but the cold, indifferent stars and the approaching Scythe fleet. Then, space itself began to tear. Not the clean, elegant blue-white slash of a standard warp drive, but dozens of swirling, chaotic vortices of angry crimson and brilliant, molten gold. They didn't glide into real space, they punched their way through it, ripping it open as if reality itself was a flimsy curtain to be torn aside, a mere inconvenience rather than a fundamental law to be respected. The sight was profoundly, primordially wrong, and it sent a shiver of pure, instinctual fear down every Ethel spine in the room. From the bleeding, violent rifts in spacetime, the ships emerged. And they were nothing short of terrifying. They bore no resemblance to the graceful, sweeping lines of Concord vessels or even the brutal functionality of the Scythe warships. These ships were an affront to conventional ship design. They were brutalist wedges of midnight black armor plating, so dark they seemed to drink the light of the nearby star, making them appear like holes in space itself. Their surfaces were a chaotic jumble of angular protrusions, weapon emplacements, and sensor arrays, seemingly placed at random, yet giving the impression of a perfectly evolved predator. There was no artistry here, no elegance. This was pure, weaponized geometry, a philosophy of war made manifest in metal. The lead vessel was a behemoth, a monster of a ship that dwarfed anything the Ethel had ever built. It was easily the size of 3 Scythe dreadnoughts laid end to end, a floating mountain of intimidation. At its prow, a massive emblem glowed with a cold, internal fire, a symbol that hadn't been seen in this quadrant of the galaxy for 20 years, a stylized blue earth, cradled and protected by 2 heavily armored, gauntlet hands. It was the insignia of the Terran Coalition's long-vanished Aegis fleet. Lena Petrova, who moments before had been the voice of cynical reason, could only whisper, her voice trembling with a terrifying, exhilarating awe. By the first stars they actually came. A comms channel chimed, not with the usual static-laced request, but with a signal so crisp and clear it felt like it was originating from inside the bunker. With a hand that shook almost imperceptibly, Vance accepted the connection. The main view screen blinked and resolved to show a human bridge. It was stark, functional, and almost brutally minimalist. There were no holographic decorations, no comfort stations, just cold, gray metal and glowing consoles. In the center of this Spartan command deck stood a woman in her mid-40s. She had piercing, intelligent eyes the color of cobalt and close-cropped silver hair that seemed to shimmer under the harsh bridge lighting. Her dark blue uniform was simple, adorned with minimal insignia, yet she radiated an aura of absolute command. Her posture was relaxed, but it was the coiled relaxation of a panther, every muscle ready to spring. Behind her, her bridge crew moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, but what truly chilled Vance to the bone was the realization that every single one of them, from the helm officer to the sensor technician, was openly carrying a sidearm. They were armed on the bridge of their own flagship. "Commander Vance, I presume?" the woman asked. Her voice, filtered through the translator, was calm and steady, with a low, resonant timbre. "I am Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran Coalition ship Retribution. Apologies for the late arrival. We had to plot a precision gravity well jump to avoid announcing our presence to the whole neighborhood." Vance struggled to find his voice, the sheer reality of the moment threatening to overwhelm him. "Captain Rostova, on behalf of the Ethel people, I don't have the words to express our gratitude." An urgent, clean-toned alarm suddenly blared on the Retribution's bridge. A tactical officer behind Rostova spoke, his voice never rising in pitch. "Captain, Scythe fleet is reorienting. They're registering us as the primary threat." Rostova's gaze didn't flicker from her screen. "Apologies for the interruption, Commander," she said, her tone shifting from polite introduction to ice-cold business. "It looks like the welcoming party is turning its attention to us. We have already analyzed your tactical situation. The Terran Aegis fleet will engage and neutralize all Scythe vessels in orbit. Our dedicated support craft will begin civilian evacuation immediately. Transmit your primary shelter coordinates to my tactical officer. Now." Vance's mind reeled. Engage? They were outnumbered almost 3-1. "Captain, wait," he pleaded, a new wave of fear washing over him, fear for these insane, magnificent rescuers. "The Scythe hegemony, their ships are designed for adaptive combat. They will analyze your weapon signatures, your shield frequencies, and they will develop countermeasures on the fly. It's how they've conquered a dozen systems." For the very first time since she appeared on his screen, Captain Eva Rostova smiled. It was not a comforting or reassuring smile. It was a feral, predatory flash of teeth. It was the smile of a wolf that had just been told the sheep had very sharp, very predictable teeth. "Let them try, Commander," she said, her voice dripping with a confidence that bordered on terrifying. "The Scythe have made a lot of enemies in their bloody campaign across this spiral arm. Their biggest mistake was making one of us. They are about to discover that was a significant, and terminal, oversight." The transmission cut out, leaving the Ethel Command Center in a state of stunned, reverberating silence. On the main view screen, the human fleet moved. It wasn't a formation, it was a symphony of deadly, calculated precision. The black ship spread out, not in a defensive wall, but in an interlocking web of kill zones, creating a barrier between the bewildered Scythe fleet and the wounded planet of Haven. The Scythe, arrogant and momentarily confused by this new, unknown variable, quickly recovered their aggression. Their commanders, seeing only inferior numbers, launched their first major volley at the human fleet, hundreds of shimmering plasma torpedoes and the same sickly green particle beams that had torn through Haven's advanced defenses like paper. The human ships didn't even attempt to evade. They didn't raise shimmering, visible energy shields like every other race in the galaxy. The lead vessels, including Rostova's colossal flagship, the Retribution, simply met the assault head-on. The Ethel crew watched in breathless horror, expecting to see the black hulls flare and buckle. But nothing happened. The plasma torpedoes, the particle beams, the kinetic rounds, they all simply vanished into the strange, non-reflective hulls of the human ships. There was no flare of energy, no ripple of a shield. It was as if the attacks, carrying enough energy to crack a small moon, had been thrown into a black hole. Then, as one, the human fleet responded. And it was no longer a battle. It was an execution. It was a statement. From the angular hulls of the human ships, weapons that defied classification and known physics erupted. Brilliant, impossibly thin lances of pure white light shot out, not causing explosions on the scythe ships, but simply erasing entire sections of them from existence. A scythe cruiser, 2 miles long, was suddenly missing its entire midsection, the two remaining halves drifting apart in the vacuum, no fire, no explosion, just gone. From other ships, swarms of what looked like conventional missiles launched, but then they suddenly fractured in mid-flight, splitting into thousands of smaller, impossibly agile projectiles, each one independently homing in on a critical system, a weapon emitter, a bridge, an engine in a different enemy ship. It was a storm of guided shrapnel that overwhelmed point defense systems with sheer, impossible numbers. And from the Retribution itself, no visible weapon fired at all. Yet a trio of scythe cruisers maneuvering on the flanks suddenly began to drift, powerless. Their lights flickered and died. Their engines went cold. They hadn't been hit, they had been neutered by some invisible wave of force that had simply shut down every system on board. The Scythe, a race that had built their entire hegemony on brutal, unrelenting conquest and had never known a true naval defeat, broke. Their disciplined formations shattered into a panicked, every ship for itself rout. They weren't just retreating, they were fleeing for their very lives. On the Ethel Command Bridge, an elderly officer whispered an ancient prayer, one that hadn't been heard in centuries, a prayer to the primordial gods of chaos and creation. He was watching something that belonged not in a tactical display, but in mythology. The chaos of the rout had barely begun when a small, secondary window popped up on the view screen. Captain Rostova was back, her expression as calm and focused as if she were overseeing a routine training drill. "Commander Vance," she began, her voice cutting through the stunned silence in the bunker. "Our ground teams are deploying to begin immediate evacuation. They will be in full Mark IV environmental suits, so they'll look imposing. Inform your people. Tell them not to panic, not to resist. We mean no harm, but standard protocols must be followed for speed and efficiency. We're getting every last one of you out of here." Vance, still struggling to process the sheer, overwhelming display of power he had just witnessed, nodded numbly. "Of course, Captain. I'll pass the order immediately." But, he hesitated, the question that had been burning in his mind since the Retribution first appeared finally spilling out. Why? Why do all this for us? After 20 years of complete silence. Why now? For the briefest of moments, the icy composure of the human captain softened. A flicker of something ancient and deep passed through her eyes. "The Ethel were there for Earth when we were on our knees, Commander," she said, her voice losing its hard edge. "The Kalen Blight wasn't just a plague for you, it was a precursor to a bioweapon that was later modified and unleashed on Terra. Your scientists gave us the foundational data to develop the cure that saved billions of human lives. Humanity pays its debts. It's one of the few absolute laws we have left." Then, her voice hardened again, turning back to chilled steel. "Also," she added, "the Scythe hegemony has been on our official watch list for some time. Their methods are inefficient and messy. This incident just gave us a legitimate, Concord-sanctioned reason to take out the trash." Before Vance could even begin to unpack that cryptic and chilling statement, his own communications officer, the young ensign who had first spotted the human fleet, shouted from her console, her voice filled with a new kind of horror. "Sir. Captain Rostova's tactical team just sent us a decrypted data package. They say they recovered it from the Scythe flagship's command data core before they scuttled it. Sir, you need to see this." Vance's personal console lit up with the incoming file. As he began to read, the blood drained from his face. His skin, normally a healthy, luminescent blue, turned a pale, sickly gray. It was all there. Encrypted orders with Concord authentication keys. Detailed star charts of Haven's defenses, information the Scythe could never have obtained on their own. Weapon specifications for the particle beams that had sliced through their shields. They were top-tier, restricted-issue Concord military hardware. And at the bottom of it all, a single, damning authorization signature, Galactic Concord Security Directorate, Office of Species Purity. He opened the channel to the Retribution, his voice cracking with the agony of betrayal. They the Concord Rostova, they ordered this. They wanted us exterminated. It's worse than that, Commander, Rostova replied, her face grim. They didn't just order it, they supplied it. The Scythe are brutal, but they're technologically a blunt instrument. They lack the sophistication for a targeted planetary grid assault like the one you suffered. The weapons they used against you were given to them. This was a proxy war, a sanctioned genocide to achieve a political goal. Vance was stunned into silence, his mind refusing to accept the scale of the treachery. But why? What was the goal? We were no threat to them. He thought of his people's greatest treasure. The preservation vaults, our ancestral genetic library. It contains unmodified ethyl DNA, from before our species adapted to space. It's our history, our soul. And it's also based on the same deep storage archival technology you shared with us after the Terran Plague, Rostova finished for him, her voice cold and precise. The technology that allowed us to rebuild our own damaged genome without becoming permanently dependent on Concord medical aid and their genetic licensing fees. They wanted the vaults, and the last people who knew how to build them, erased. They wanted to ensure that no other species could ever follow our example and achieve true technological and biological independence. The Concord maintains its power through controlled dependency, Commander. A truly self-sufficient species is not a member, it's a threat. As the horrifying truth settled over the Ethel Command Center like a funeral shroud, a new proximity alert, sharp and piercing, blared through the bunker. Lena Petrova, her face a mask of disbelief, pointed a trembling finger at the tactical display. Commander. 3 massive vessels just warped into the system. Concord markings. They're their Oversight-class dreadnoughts. On the main view screen, 3 new ships appeared. Unlike the brutal, menacing forms of the human fleet, these were works of art. Gleaming white and gold, with graceful, sweeping lines, they looked like something out of a cathedral. They were beautiful, elegant, and they radiated an aura of ancient, unassailable power. They were the very pinnacle of the Galactic Concord's military might, ships that were said to be able to pacify entire systems on their own. Vance's newfound hope curdled into fresh terror. Captain Rostova, he transmitted, his voice filled with panic, your fleet is magnificent, but those are oversight vessels. They carry weaponry reserved exclusively for the Concord's highest representatives. They can level a continent from orbit. On the screen, Rostova's wolfish smile returned, sharper and more dangerous than ever before. We're counting on it, Commander, she said, her voice laced with an unnerving confidence. Please, continue with the evacuation procedures. We'll handle the landlords. She cut the feed. Her voice, no longer projected across the void but echoing with metallic authority across the Retribution's own bridge, was a command that promised violence. Battle stations. All hands, prepare for tactical engagement. And activate the reflection protocol. It's time to show them what we learned in the dark. Open a channel to the lead sheep. The face that materialized on the Retribution's main view screen was the very picture of arrogant, institutional power. He was a Xylan, one of the 3 founding species of the Galactic Concord, a race known for their intellectual prowess and their thinly veiled contempt for what they considered the younger races. He was tall, willowy, his luminous skin shimmering with an inner light that seemed to say, I am more evolved than you. His title was Praetor Kalen, and his expression was one of someone who was utterly unused to being questioned, let alone defied. Human vessel, he began, foregoing any and all diplomatic preamble. His voice was a melodic, condescending chime. You are in direct violation of Concord Directive 5593, prohibiting unauthorized military action within Concord-governed space. You will power down your weapon systems immediately and prepare to be boarded by a Concord oversight team. Your vessel will be impounded, and your command staff will be taken into custody for judgment. Captain Rostova leaned back in her command chair, the picture of casual disregard. She even took a slow sip from a simple metal mug before answering, a calculated insult that was not lost on the praetor, whose eyes narrowed fractionally. "Praetor Kalin," Rostova began, her tone light, almost conversational. "Fantastic timing. We just finished collecting and verifying a mountain of evidence detailing the Concord's direct, material involvement in the attempted genocide of the Ethel people. We have ship logs, signed orders, weapon transfer manifests, the works. Would you care to make a statement before we upload the entire, unedited package to every public news network from here to the Galactic Core?" The praetor's perfect, serene composure finally cracked. For a split second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury crossed his features before it was expertly masked by a practiced veil of diplomatic rigidity. "Internal Concord security matters are far beyond your primitive understanding or jurisdiction," he retorted, his voice now losing its melodic quality and gaining a sharp, threatening edge. "Your interference is noted and will be addressed with the utmost severity. This is your final warning. Power down your systems. Now." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Rostova replied, setting her mug down with a soft click. She nodded to her tactical officer, a young man whose fingers were already dancing across his console. "And about our primitive understanding, we've been monitoring Concord weapons development from our little corner of the galaxy for the past 20 years. We've read all your technical journals, intercepted your R&D data streams. We're particularly fond of your latest generation Axiom cannon. Let me save you the trouble of charging it up." As she spoke, a network of previously invisible satellites, small, stealthy drones that had been deployed by the human support ships, suddenly activated. They bathed the 3 Concord dreadnoughts in a harmless, multispectrum scanning light. On the bridge of the praetor's ship, klaxons began to scream. "What is this sorcery?" Kalin demanded, his composure finally shattering as his own officers shouted damage reports about phantom energy spikes and system intrusions. "It's not sorcery, praetor. It's math," Rostova explained calmly, a teacher lecturing a particularly slow student. "We call it the reflection protocol. It's quite simple, really. Our satellite network is currently scanning your vessels at the quantum level. Your shield harmonics, your energy signatures, your weapon charging sequences. Any weapon system you activate and target against us will be instantly analyzed, its energy pattern replicated, and returned to you, in kind, at precisely the same nanosecond you fire. Your own Axiom cannon, for instance, would vaporize your own ship before the beam even had a chance to fully form. You've essentially placed a gun to your own head. And our finger is on your trigger." She let that sink in, watching the dawning horror on the Xylan's face. Then she delivered the killing blow. "Oh, and I should mention. That data package proving your war crimes. It wasn't just sent to the news networks. An hour ago, it was transmitted via encrypted, FTL data burst to the government of every single signatory species of the Concord Charter. We included everything. The orders for the Ethel, and the plans we found for 12 other species who were showing a little too much technological independence. And just as a little bonus, a gesture of goodwill, we also included the complete, open-source technical specifications for our reflection protocol. Merry Christmas." The color drained completely from the praetor's luminous face. He looked not just defeated, but broken, as if the very foundations of his universe had crumbled beneath him. "You can't," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "This will create chaos. Unrestricted technological proliferation, it will lead to anarchy. The Concord maintains peace through controlled advancement." "No," Rostova countered, her voice now hard as diamond. "The Concord maintains power through enforced dependency. What you call peace is a cage. You're not afraid of chaos, praetor. You're afraid of a galaxy of equals. You're afraid of losing control. But you're right, it will create something. It will create freedom. Perhaps a galactic community built on genuine cooperation, rather than your brand of enforced ignorance, might be worth exploring. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his through the view screen. So, you have a choice. Fire upon us and discover, firsthand, just how well we truly understand your incomprehensible weapons technology. Or, you can turn your beautiful, expensive ships around, go home, and explain to the rest of the Concord that the paradigm has shifted. That humanity is back in the game. And this time, we're changing the rules. The transmission ended. For a long, agonizing minute that stretched into an eternity, the three magnificent Concord dreadnoughts just sat there, silent and motionless. They were wolves that had suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered by a dragon they had long dismissed as a lizard. Then, slowly, almost mournfully, they turned, their elegant forms seeming to slump in defeat, and one by one, they tore open a rift in space and vanished. Commander Vance watched from his bunker as the last Ethel transport, filled with civilians, lifted off from the scarred surface of Haven. His people were safe. They were refugees, homeless and scattered, but they were alive. He opened a final, private channel to the Retribution. "Captain," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the day's revelations. "They told us the whole galaxy believed that you withdrew from the galactic stage because of wounded pride after the Orion Flare incident." On her bridge, surrounded by the quiet hum of her victorious fleet, Captain Rostova looked out at the starfield, at the infinite possibilities of the galaxy before her. "The Orion Flare incident was a lie, Commander," she said softly, but with an undercurrent of steel. "We staged it. The pirates were real, but our response was theater. It was the perfect, dramatic excuse we needed to pull back, to disappear from the Concord's watchful eyes without raising suspicion. We knew even back then that they were corrupt. We knew they feared our rate of progress. We needed time. We needed to be left alone." She turned to look directly at Vance, her cobalt eyes burning with an intensity that crossed the void of space. "That 20 years of isolation wasn't a punishment, Commander. It wasn't us sulking in a corner. It was the single most productive period in human history. It was preparation." Across the vast star-strewn canvas of the galaxy, on 17 different worlds, leaders of independent-minded species that had felt the quiet, oppressive boot of the Concord on their necks for centuries received an encrypted message. It was a message that would ignite a firestorm of rebellion and change. It contained all the evidence of the Concord's crimes, the open-source plans for the Reflection Protocol, and a short, simple, earth-shaking statement. The era of enforced dependency is over. Humanity stands with those who seek true independence. We're back. The galaxy had forgotten why they once feared humanity. They had dismissed the stories as hyperbole, the warnings as paranoia. They thought the giant was sleeping, wounded and bitter. But it had been awake the whole time, watching, learning, and sharpening its claws. It had been waiting for the right moment to return. Not as a conqueror, but as something far more dangerous to the old powers of the galaxy, a liberator. And its work was just beginning. In a world, in a galaxy, that never stops talking, we're taught that power is loud. It's the politician on the screen, the billionaire launching rockets, the empire with the biggest fleet making the most noise. But this story it whispers a different, more dangerous truth. It's a truth that feels right at home here in Texas, where we value quiet strength and self-reliance. True power isn't about the show. It's about what you build when no one is watching. Humanity didn't win because they were the loudest, they won because they were the most prepared. They walked away from the galactic poker table, and everyone else thought they had folded. But in reality, they just went home to build a better hand. The greatest strength, the most terrifying potential, isn't found in the threats you make. It's found in the silence you keep, in the work you do in the dark. It's a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to walk away, get your house in order, and wait for the perfect moment to return and change the whole damn game. Humanity's 20-year isolation was a strategic deception, a long con that ultimately ended a genocide and shattered a corrupt galactic power. But does the nobility of the outcome justify the profound dishonesty of the method? Is their new, self-appointed role as the galaxy's liberator truly a noble cause, or is it just a new, more benevolent form of control, backed by incomprehensible power? I want to know what you think. Drop your unfiltered thoughts in the comments below, because this is a massive ethical question with no easy answers. And if this story gave you chills, made you think, or just made you say, hell yeah, do us a huge favor and hit that like button, subscribe for more journeys into the deep, and share this with someone who appreciates a galaxy-shaking what if.